So we pictured our cowboy, right? We pictured them around a bonfire and telling stories. So this is how tall tales happen, and this is how tall tales got told to different groups of people, okay? They would be out on a trail, probably taking a group of cattle or something over to another area. And so late at night, while they're all relaxing, they didn't have a TV, did they? No. They probably didn't take a bunch of books with them. Maybe someone took a book with them, right? But they were tired. They've been riding all day. They've been working all day. And they're like, hey, Jimmy Bob, tell us a story, right? So Jimmy Bob would tell a story that Bobby Lou told him at the campfire when he was with another group of guys, right? So that's how it got spread. It went from one group to another, to another, to another. And sometimes late at night, if someone, like a little kid, was laying in bed, and they're like, tell me a bedtime story. These might have been told to them then too, right? So these are called tall tales, meaning they are not true, okay? There could have been, and there might have been, and there probably was, someone that was alive and did something similar, but not to this extent. Like we talked about what's that?
He's a real person.
The one that Jake and the Giant Beanstalk, is that it? Jack. I was like, what is his name? I kept wanting to say James and the Giant Peach, and that's not what I was going to say. But that one works too, I guess. But Jack and the Beanstalk. Alright, it's Monday. Okay, Jack and the Beanstalk. We know that maybe this boy did go and sell the cow for beans, and his mom was probably mad, right? But I'm sure he didn't plant the beans and this big thing grow, and he go up to this secret town where a giant, and he beat the giant, right?
Yeah.
That's probably not what happened, okay? There might have been a boy named Jack that sold a cow for beans and got in trouble, but that's probably the extent of how that story went, right? So they added some fun detail and made it more alive and made it a moral of a story, right? What is a moral of a story? Charisma? Like what you're supposed to take away, right? The main point you're supposed to take away, like a lesson, okay? So like when we talk about, we'll talk about the moral of this story, but like with Jack and the Beanstalk, they try to make a moral of even a little boy can defeat a giant, but they also try to tell you like things can still work out, right? Because then he got money from the giant, right? So, Ben, do you have a question?
If he actually saw a giant, was trouble with Goliath.
Maybe. All right, so we are going to look at this. So this isn't in your book, just listen. Back when the West was still being tamed, hundreds of cowboys roamed the plains, drifting from job to job. Cowboys have been made to look dashing and brave. So they've been made to look like handsome and brave and strong, okay? But most of them were just young men who worked long hours far from home with very little pay, okay? Most of them could not read well, and books were rare anyway. So there weren't like big libraries. Even towns that had libraries, they were usually small and had few books, right? And some, especially the boys, they didn't read very well because they didn't go to school for very long, because they had to leave school early to go and help with the land, right? Does that make sense? So by the time they got a certain age, they didn't go to school anymore, and they would have to help their dad in the fields. Also, even the years that they did go to school, sometimes in the fall they couldn't go anyway, because the fall is when we harvest the fields, right? We bring in the corn and the wheat and all that stuff. So they had to be able to be home during the fall to help dad, right? So they could go to school during the winter when school was able to be had in the winter because there were no crops coming in and no planting needing to be done. Make sense? So they had very little time in school. So now we're going to talk about Pecos Bill, okay? Developed from a magazine article written by Edward O'Reilly, Pecos Bill is an American folklore hero. He is said to be responsible for the invention of roping, branding, and numerous other cowboy skills. So this was a person made to represent all cowboys, okay? He was made to represent and signify the strong braveness of the cowboys, and he was like a cowboy's hero, okay? So like something that every cowboy wanted to become. He was supposedly the one that made roping, like where they lasso a horse or a cow, or branding, where they would take the iron instrument that would have their specific design on it, and they'd burn it onto the cow. That way, if it got loose, they knew who it was, okay? So someone couldn't say, oh, no, that's my cow. And you could be like, no, it has my brand on it. Does that make sense? And they said in a lot of other cowboy skills, okay? So we are going to read the story. So a couple words that we're going to come up against are brawnish, or brawniest. Brawniest. That means physically strong or muscular, okay? A whirlwind is like a tornado, okay? Or like a, I think the best way for you guys to think of it would be like a tornado, okay? Courtship would be like dating, okay? And a bustle. A bustle is something that a girl would wear under her dress that would make the back of it bigger. So that's what made like the back stick out. That's a bustle. And it was usually made from some type of wire. And then a lariat is a rope used as a lasso. Okay? So look at page 60. Look at page 60. And we're going to read this story. Okay? Pecos Bill gets a wife. Be following along, okay? This is a fun, funny story. Pecos Bill that... Page 60. 60. 60. All right. Pecos Bill, that rootin' tootin' cowboy. He figured he had just about everything. Why, he had Scat the cougar, and he had Rat the python, and of course he had Widowmaker, the biggest, brawniest horse in the West. A horse that only Pecos Bill could ride. So the cowboy was mighty content, figuring there was nothing else in the whole wide world he would ever want. But one day, Pecos Bill was moseying down the river trail on old Widowmaker's back. He was taking it kind of slow and easy, about 60 miles an hour, when all of a sudden something stopped him right in his tracks. So right there, hold on. He's got a pet python, a pet cougar, and a horse that going slow is 60 miles an hour. That's a lot of stretching the truth, right? Makes sense? So that's part of tall tale telling, right? Making things seem bigger than they are. It was a sight the likes of what Pecos Bill had never seen before in all his days. Speeding down the middle of the river on the back of a giant catfish was a cowgirl. What a cowgirl. Her hair was as red as the evening sun, all tied up in 2 braids, looking like 2 carrots sticking out of her head. Her hat flapped on the ends of its strings. Yippee-yah-ho, she yelled. Her 2 long bony arms wrapped around the catfish's body. Yahoo! Yip yip yahoo! So saying that her hair looked like 2 carrots is a good image, right? Like it's a good way to imagine what it looked like. But is it probable that she rode a catfish?
No.
No. Okay? So part of it we're like, okay, we know it's not actually 2 carrots, but that's an imagery, right? Way for you to imagine it. The fact that she's riding a giant catfish down the river, that's exaggerating, right? No doubt about it, it was love at first sight. Pecos Bill felt his heart do a double flip and the sweat stand out on his brow. He had to meet this cowgirl. Even while he watched, the catfish took a wild leap and landed on the bank, gasping for breath. The red-headed cowgirl hopped off, and with one quick toss, she flipped the catfish back into the water. Then she turned to face Pecos Bill. "Howdy, cowboy," she grinned wide to show off all 6 of her teeth, shining white and pearly. The freckles on her face stood out bold and orange. Pecos Bill's heart jumped into his throat, and he couldn't speak for gazing at her beauty. So she kept right on talking. "My name's Slewfoot Sue. I come down the river to find me some new critters to ride. I done rode everything this country has to offer. I've rode grizzly bars and mountain lions and wild horses, and now I've rode a catfish too." She grinned again and poured the water out of her boot. "What have you rode, cowboy?" All Pecos Bill could do was smile. There was a whirlwind courtship, and Slewfoot Sue decided she loved this cowboy as much as he loved her. But as crazy as Bill was about Sue, there was one thing he wouldn't let her do. "Sue," he told her, "I've got to warn you. Everything I have is yours, including Widowmaker. But he's a fiery horse, and he won't let anyone ride him but me. If you try, I might never see you again." Well, those were the very words Sue needed to hear to make her want to ride Widowmaker more than anything else in the world. So just like if your mom's like, "Don't eat that candy until we get home," all you can think about is eating that candy bar, right? Because you were told not to do it. Sue didn't mention it again, but that was not to say it left her mind. She could think of hardly anything else. Their wedding day came, and my didn't Sue look pretty. She wore a white veil and a long white dress with a bustle the size of a bushel basket. Bustles were quite the style back then, you know, and Sue's was made from a brand new bed spring and the finest chicken wire around, so she's got a big old spring, right? There never was a happier man than Pecos Bill on his wedding day. Well, no sooner had they said "I do," and their preacher pronounced his blessings than Slewfoot Sue hollered "Yahoo!" and raced outside quicker than a jackrabbit and hopped on Widowmaker's back. That was one surprised horse, and that was one surprised bride. Widowmaker bucked hard, and Slewfoot Sue's second "Yahoo!" faded off into the distance as she disappeared from sight behind the clouds. So that's saying he bucked her, and with the spring being on the back of her dress, it bounced her all the way up through the clouds. They all stood watching, Bill, the preacher, and all the cowboys, their mouths hanging wide open. "We might never see her again," Pecos Bill muttered. "I warned her." Well, rumor had it that Sue had to duck her head to keep from hitting the moon. But whatever happened, she appeared again that evening, falling right out of the sky. She would have landed with only a few bruises except for that bustle she was wearing. Instead of landing, Sue bounced. Sue bounced up until she was out of sight in the sky again. When she came back down, she bounced again. This could have gone on for days or even weeks, but finally Pecos Bill decided he had had enough. He figured his new bride probably had too. So he pulled out his lariat and waited. The next time Sue bounced, Bill lassoed her and brought her down. If it hadn't been for his strong muscles, she could have bounced again. But she stayed, and was a little dizzy and bruised, but otherwise she was fine. From what I hear, Pecos Bill and Slewfoot Sue had a right happy life together as husband and wife. And one thing that made it happy was that never again did Slewfoot Sue ask to ride Widowmaker. She was cured of that forever.